So I'm going to go ahead and get started right away. Our first Silver Circle recipient is one of San Diego's most experienced and respected reporters. To tell us more about Steve Bosh is a man who has been directing newsrooms for 40 years. He's a multiple Emmy winner, founding executive producer of Court TV, I didn't know that, news director at KUSI TV here in San Diego, Steve Cohen. Steve, would you come up, please?
I know you think after that introduction I should come up here with a cane and a walker. I just want to start, since I'm the first speaker, just to say something to all of us in this room here. This is so extraordinary, San Diego natives. I've been at, I'm one of these guys who've been everywhere, New York, LA, Boston, all these places. You could not gather a group like this to celebrate people who have been part of this community for 25 or 40 years. It doesn't exist in the rest of America. That we have at these tables wonderful electronic journalists who can be honored is a real tribute to all of you. So applause for yourselves. So let me dive into this. This is the guy that we're going to give this to is one of the humblest, most humane, nicest fellows you'd ever meet. His humility is so overwhelming that when Brian and I conspired to nominate him for this award, he didn't know about it, because if he did, he wouldn't let us put his name in. So we tell him, hey, this is great, Steve, you're going to get inducted to the Silver Circle. And he comes up to me in my office. He always calls me boss, because he thinks the redundancy of Steve to Steve doesn't make any sense. So he calls me boss, and I call him Bosh. He says, boss, why don't you mail me this thing? I don't know if I really want to show up, but we forced him here, and he's here. The beginnings of a lot of great guys start in humble places. We know this from folks we all know about. The man from Hope, we know who he is. The guy from Hawaii or Kenya, depending on your political point of view. Rick Perry, who's from Paint Creek, right? Paint Creek, Texas, which was a little house without warm water, cold water flat. And Steve Bosh comes from a little town outside of Pittsburgh, which is so humble and so small, I know this, you're not going to believe this, had no name. It's a rural district, and out of the 12 kids that were in Steve's family, they called it Bosh Hill, right? That's where Steve came from, and I think we couldn't be better than honoring a fellow like Steve Bosh, who has the attributes that you always look for in a correspondent, but more importantly in a person. I want to start with storyteller. Steve's a great storyteller, but not the kind that just takes something that goes from A to Z. Standard stories where there's a protagonist, something happens to the protagonist, and there's a conclusion and a minute 15 arc. What we do in our shop is we say that's a Bosh. Whenever there's a Bosh story, which is always a story that nobody else can explain. It's arcane, it's difficult, maybe even dull if in the hands of somebody else. An example of this would be when I was talking to Bosh, I said, look, we need to do something on this thing called QE2, which I thought was like the president gave Bernanke the right to build another Queen Elizabeth, It's not, it's quantitative easing. Bosh said, I can do that. Quietly, he'd say, I can do that. And whether the story is QE2, pension reform, why Donna Fry didn't make it because of X's and O's on her ballot, Steve Bosh is always the guy that would do it. Bosh also is someone who is extraordinarily calm in difficult situations. Here's one that you'll all know. You're in your newsroom, the assignment editor is up on his feet screaming and a number of expletives about getting a crew to a developing SWAT. You're at that period in your newscast where there's no anchor people. The anchors haven't shown up yet for the late shift. Your morning anchors are gone. There's a hole right there between 1 and 2 o'clock. And you need somebody to go on the air right away. So I walk over to Bosh, and he's there, working. This is how he passes his time, working in ink on the New York Times crossword puzzle. This is the kind of guy I got. So he's got a little bit of intellect. So I noticed he's working on the puzzle, and it's a 13-letter word across that's got a D at the start of it. And I said, hey, look, I got to interrupt you because I need you to do this cut-in. So he's really calm. I give him this. He goes, he does the cut-in. He comes back, and he writes in to the little blurb there, which said, a damaged orator. And then he writes in Demosthenes. So, okay, that's Steve Bosh. Intellect, calm in a storm. And also, he's someone who's curious about everything, which is really important. We all have curiosity. That's what makes us great journalists, but Steve has a curiosity that's beyond the pale. He often will come to me on Fridays with my reading material for the weekend. He likes me to be, intelligent, so he'll give me what he's curious about. So he gives me a piece of paper every other weekend from some place called Imprimis, which is a publication of a conservative small college called Hillsdale, a great college. He hands it to me. I put it in my folder. I get home on Saturday afternoon, just resting. I say, oh, I'll see what Bosh gave me to read. I open it up, and here's what Bosh is curious about that day. And here's the title of it. The impact of a declining United States dollar as opposed to a bundling of European currencies and their impact on the valuation of the yuan. Okay, well, that's good. That's what Steve's curious about. And I'm happy to read it. And then he'll quiz me on Monday. He'll say, hey, did you read that? I said, yeah, I did. On the serious side, Bosh always has backbone, which is what we always go to him for stories that are going to cause us problems, where we know that there are interest groups out there that will not like what we report. A recent example would be some finagling on a redistricting committee by union members and Democrats who are trying to alter some of the redistricting. I said to Bosh, hey, this is going to get us in trouble. There are going to be a lot of people who don't like us. And Steve just looked at me and said, I can do that. Don't worry about it. We'll get it right. That's what Steve Bosh is about. In a time when so many kids come out of school these days with no compass at all, let alone a moral compass, Steve Bosh has one inside of him that always points true north. So join me in welcoming Steve Bosh into the Silver Circle.
How about that, huh? Good afternoon. Let me first thank my boss, Steve Cohen, for nominating me for this Silver Circle Award and for that really kind and generous introduction. Thank you very much, boss. And of course, my thanks go out to the Academy as well for accepting that nomination. Now, speeches are not really my thing. I'm not really a very good ad-libber, kind of like my friend Ed Linderman over here. And I need a teleprompter, so it's kind of like President Obama, if you know what I mean. So I'm not going to stand here and in any way detail my 40-plus years in broadcasting. But let me say broadcasting for me started with a small group of students in Denver, Colorado at a vocational school. This was in the mid-1960s. 6 months later, I was actually reading the news on a radio station in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Population, 5,000. If you haven't been to Colorado, it's Glenwood Springs is midway between Aspen and Vail. It was at a station they called a daytimer, meaning that it could only broadcast during the day. You couldn't sign on the station until dawn, and when dusk rolled around at the end of the day, you had to sign off. And you were the only person there the entire day. And in those days, to work at one of these stations, you actually had to pass a government test, and you had to get a license called a third-class FCC license. Now, of course, this had nothing to do with broadcasting the news, but you had to take transmitter readings and record them in a log. So the person who did that had to have a third-class FCC license. So anyway, I took that job with the understanding that I would stay 2 years, and I did to the day. This was at a time when All News Radio was coming into being, and All News Radio came to Denver, and I went to work there. Then I switched over to television in Denver at KOA. Then I moved on to Pittsburgh, where I worked 4 years. Then just about 10 years in New York City, #1 market in the country. Spent just about 10 years there, moved on and worked 7 years in Dallas, and finally came to San Diego to KUSI, where I worked for 20 years, working on 21. Happy to say I'm still on the job. Like many people in the television industry, I'm kind of a rather shy person. I'd rather listen than talk. My wife Cindy, who's over here, would rather it be the other way around sometimes, or at least sometimes. But it's worked for us for more than 30 years, and we raised 2 fine children. My daughter Pamela, who is over here, goes to the University of San Francisco, and she's here with her friend Will Hubbard. And my son happens to work at MSNBC in New York at 30 Rock. He's a producer for MSNBC. And that's about it for me. So I'll just end by saying longevity is really a great quality. And it certainly is of great importance to the Academy. That's why we're here today. It has a lot of meaning to me, too. So thank you very much for being here. And thanks to the Academy.
Steve, if we could have you also come up for just a moment. I failed to mention that what we're going to do each time is a little photo opportunity here.
Oh, great.
It's my pleasure to present you with this.
Thank you very much.
And in addition, your pen, so I'll give you the pen. And if we could have a picture of the two of you together, and we have a...
Yeah, 1, 2. Good.
For Nate, let's let our guy.